Welcome to Power of the Tribe podcast. I'm your host, John Connors. I'm also the founder of Connors Martial Arts here in Norwood, Mass. We teach Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai kickboxing, and mixed martial arts. Send me a message and come down and see us and find the inner badass in you. And I'm also the founder of a cold, Dan. For the first time I've had a cold. I've been bragging for the last 3 or 4 years how I never get a cold. And I got a cold this week, as you can hear. Here's my host, Dan Robin.
Now, what I think's awkward, John, is that this is the week I also have a cold.
We both.
So I was going to be able to be like, I'm the guy with the cold. And now it sounds, I think it's just more awkward with both of us sounding like we have colds.
This is not good. Is it we've become too connected? Like one of those dopey social psychological experiments. Our colds have become entrained that we both.
It's just in my head.
Which one of us? I'm referencing, which I've just read an article about this study. So there's a famous study at one of the colleges. I think it was one of the women's colleges, Simmons or something, where they did this study, and they found that all the women living on the same floor would start to have their periods at the same time. Right. They would become synced up and trained or something like this, and this is typical
of pheromones or something. I remember
pheromones. They smell it.
Hearing that 30 years ago,
right?
Yeah,
and people thought this was fantastic, and it's so exciting. And then the alpha female, all the other less than alpha, the beta or whatever females, they would all fall in line with the head alpha female.
Oh, see, I didn't hear that part.
That's part of it, I think, too. I just read an article this week that that study, like 90% of these social psychological studies, is complete nonsense.
Oh, it's not true.
It's nonsense. And then,
but is even the syncing up not true, or just the alpha
not true?
Part? None of it's true.
None of it's true. It's complete nonsense. And you know, as a guy with expertise in statistics, you would understand. Like they did some statistical things, so they just took some minor changes in when the periods are happening, and then extrapolated. Oh yeah, they're all syncing up.
Oh, so they weren't literally happening.
No,
all at the same time. They were just kind of
exactly.
Yeah,
so they start them at some random point, and they're not happening at the same time. And then they check a couple months later, and some of them had varied, like they weren't perfectly regular. And they're like, oh, and from that some little changes there, they just extrapolated that. Oh, they all are trending together, which is nonsense. They're all just kind of varying. And you could take any data and use their extrapolation and come up with the same answers. So,
well, I'm not sure if there's any effect of that study not being true, right? Like, of all these things, does that matter at all?
That's a really good philosophical question, Dan. And I think the reason why it matters is because it hurts science. When you put dopey science out there, you frickin' hurt science.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they're getting exposed now because it's making people more aware of what good science is and what bad science is. So, yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, they've been exposing bad science again for decades and decades, right?
Right.
I remember when I was in school, they talked about a study where it was it worms or something like this, where something would learn to make its way through a maze. I don't think it was rats because the next part is a little, but like basically is whatever it was would learn something.
Okay.
Like a way through a maze. Say it was rats.
All right.
And then they would take all the rats, like slow learners and fast learners, and they chop them up and feed them.
They chop up the people who figured out the maze.
This is why I'm thinking it might be worms instead of rats, because it sounds. They'd chop them up and feed them to the other rats, like to random rats, and then they were saying that if you fed the smart maze learners to the dumb, if you fed smart maze learners, those rats would learn mazes quicker than if you fed like the slow learners, like in the food.
Yeah. So like the wisdom was like magically in the cells.
And I remember one of my professors from way back being like inspired by being like, that cannot possibly be true. And like went on a
that's one of your professors did that in college.
Yeah. And went on a crusade against it and found that it wasn't true. You know, obviously it makes no sense. but it exposes the power of, if you want to find a result in science, you can find it. You know, like
Right.
you can find it, and it's a big problem. There's a
Huge.
guy. Have you heard of Daryl Bem? Have we talked about him? Daryl Bem's a professor I had back in college, and it's unclear what he's doing. He's proving scientifically all these kind of ESP effects. And what he's doing is he's showing like
So, pardon me, Dan.
Yeah.
He's a professor at Cornell,
yeah, psychologist,
psychologist. Okay.
and he's proving all kinds of ESP effects, like the tests they're doing at the beginning of Ghostbusters,
Yeah.
like what's on the card, and he's showing all kinds of effects, or like people, are influenced by something that there's going to be shown 5 seconds later,
Right. Right.
and it's all like you said, it's not exact, but they're little influences,
Right.
But what he's doing is he's saying, I have as much proof for this as like all these major findings. Statistically.
So he's using
proof is-
the goofy tests to put shade on some other so-called legitimate experiments that are happening.
Well,
Science.
see, this is what I'm taking from it.
Uh-huh.
I personally suspect that he believes in the ESP.
Oh, I think he's not trolling science.
It's unclear.
It's unclear.
So which makes it a
fascinating.
fantastic troll if it is what he's doing. But to me, I'm like, this is fascinating in that you're exposing all of science. You're saying, look, if you believe these other things, I have just as much
right.
proof. You have to believe my ESP results.
Right.
That said, I think maybe he just believes the ESP results. Like he might just believe
That's
in-
very funny. Some of the problems, I love all that ESP stuff. I loved Ghostbusters when it came out. I love that scene where he's like shocking. Bill Murray's hitting on the hot student, and then the poor guy is in there. He actually is exhibiting some ESP, and he's hitting the guy with the electric shock just to mess with him. And it seems to be improving his response to the ESP. His ESP is getting better. That's such a funny scene. But I love all that stuff. What would always occur to me, though, is you got this guy who is like, I have amazing abilities, and he can basically bend a piece of wire without touching it. And so the obvious next question would be, so what the hell good is that? You know what I mean? Like
if you even could.
Yeah, the CIA and the military is investing billions for this guy to bend a wire without touching it. Well, we can just reach out and touch it. What do we need him to do this for?
Right.
He's not Magneto. He can't make tanks completely implode with the power of his mind.
And he can't even do that either.
He can't even do the wire
They're
thing.
usually
I know.
sleight of hand guys that figure out ways to do that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But
because these sleight of hand guys can be really clever, like really good at tricking you.
you should listen. You ever listen to Banacek? So he's a entertainer mentalist, but he was involved with the Amazing Randi and some of this early stuff where he got involved with some universities that were studying this, and he went in as this supposed like naive savant and just did all kinds of shenanigans to fool these scientists. And these are real scientists that would have let themselves be fooled so easily. There's some flaw in the human brain that allows itself to be open to just pure manipulation.
And there's other things with science in particular where if you find something, it's so much better for your career than if you don't find it.
Oh, right, of course.
It's way different.
Yeah.
So, that's why there's intentional fraud, and then there's just kind of little tweaks of the data because, think of these grad students where it's like, well, if you get your PhD now, you can come on as a postdoc here. And it's like, if you don't, like if that thing is a non-significant,
right,
then we don't want you. Or,
that's the big
really
challenge
derail your whole career
of all this psychology and ESP. It's so fuzzy that it's not science because it can't really be replicated. It's not congruent with chemistry and biology and physics and everything else.
But you reminded me, you said about bending the wire and be like, if that's all you can do, who even really cares?
Yeah.
I've had that conversation about ghosts before where someone will say I had, an incredible experience where I put a shampoo bottle down and then it was like, I screwed the cap on tight and then like it popped off like a minute later, and he was like, I was like, don't you think it was slippery from, and he's like, no, there's no way. It was a good, it was some kind of spirit. But then my next follow-up point was, all right, so in 30 years of life, the only thing any ghost has done is pop a shampoo cap off.
Right. You're walking
Like, it
around,
doesn't-
millions of spirits are walking around here. And one of the million happened to one time pop off a soap.
Yeah, it's like
shampoo
not
bottle.
really relevant for your life anyway. Like if that
That-
is, you know, if
That-
that's
yeah.
what they can do. If like, so when you're 60, a pencil's going to be knocked off a table.
Right.
Like it's sort of not really a big deal, even if they were here.
Yeah.
But
unless they're a poltergeist and they
Yeah.
can like start throwing furniture around the room.
yeah, well then we can talk. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. If your experience is furniture flying around the room, you got
That's
my
it.
interest. But until then, you know, because I've gone around a room. If you ask any room full of people, I think 3 out of 4 is going to have some ghost story from their past.
Ghost stories are intriguing, Dan.
Yeah.
They are. But it's so
People get
obvious
mad. I'm sure
nonsense.
people listening are getting mad already. Like,
that you're doubting that ghosts
yeah,
exist.
doubting well, each story that, like, I went around a room, and these were like postdocs and graduate students, and they all had their ghosts, and each one would be like, I was in the woods, and I came upon, everything was covered with leaves, and there was this one big rock with just no leaves on it, just like in the middle of the trees, and I was like, do you think maybe the wind could have blown the leaves off?
What
the
was
rock?
his theory?
It was her. She was like, it was like, but the follow up was also like, yeah, but there was also like a really weird feeling. And I'm like,
Oh, right.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Yeah.
You didn't tell me about the
And
weird
I'm
feeling.
like, that's it. That's your story. I'm like, but then they start getting mad at you because, you know, I don't like tease them, but I'm just sort of like, you know, I'll say.
Right. If you start
well,
asking rational questions, like even if you're not teasing them, you'd say, so your theory, let me explain this. Let me see if
Yeah.
I understand this. Your theory is that a spirit cleaned off the rock from leaves for some reason. And they'd go,
They'd start getting
yeah.
mad. Yeah.
So why do you think they cleaned this rock off? Well, I don't know. Yeah, they would
right.
get mad at
They
you.
start getting mad.
Yeah. So
I had
they're
one more-
operating in a different part of their brain.
I had
than-
one where they were walking past a house and they got a weird vibe and they saw kind of like a figure in the window. And
Right.
that was the end of the story. I was like, wait, couldn't it be a
like an actual person.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, why couldn't it be a person? And it was the same thing. It was like, it was just a weird. If you were there, you would have felt the same. And I'm like, the same group hysteria of you and your friends? I don't think so.
That is, I have a grand theory about this, Dan. So this is going to be our new thing. I'm going to give you my grand epiphany of the week. So tell me what you think about this. So ghosts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And see, I watch a lot of these documentaries on cults. They got a few of them on Netflix. And for the most part, they're very interesting. And what's most interesting is how people can just suspend critical thinking and leave their families, everything behind, and go with some guru who doesn't really seem to be offering anything.
And you said they often don't seem that exceptional, right? They don't see. They're not.
They
like,
don't seem
They're
exceptional.
not like 6'8" and
They're not
beautiful.
exceptional.
And, you know, they're
One of the guys was this little guy with bleach blonde hair, and his name was Michel, and they try to make them exceptional. He speaks 8 languages, blah, blah, blah. When they'd all unraveled, it took like 20 years to unravel. He's Mexican-American guy, Jaime Hernandez. He does, he speaks 2 languages, Spanish and English, which is fine. It's great, but he doesn't speak 8.
Well, my experience with 8 languages means 2 to 3. Anyone I've
Yeah.
known that if you speak 5 languages, that's going to be a solid 2.
Definitely.
You know, like they.
Yeah,
I
they
don't
can
know if-
order a cup of coffee in 8 languages.
Right.
Great. That's really not speaking the language.
Because I've known a bunch of people that are like, I speak a bunch of languages, and then you go to that country, and they're like, I have no idea what anyone's saying. You know? Like, I thought you're fluent in French, and they're like, the waiter's talking to us in French, and they're like, I have no idea what you're saying.
It's a regional dialect.
So you're sort of like, all right, when you say fluent,
Yeah, people toss that around loosely. They
Yeah.
like that idea. So here's my idea. And so usually these cults and these kind of wacky religions and whatnot, they have a fantastical story, like a magical story, like they may heal people by just touching them or something. And it seems like some people would rather be healed by magic than by actual science. Like if a doctor spent years researching and testing and came up with a pill that cured you of something, that would be fine. But they would rather have the guy touch them magically and cure them instead, which isn't rational. I'm like, so why do they? So people are attracted to magic. And what I think it is, and ghosts are kind of magical, is if magic exists, if ghosts exist, then that sort of answers the fear of what happens after death.
Well, ghosts for sure.
Right.
And that's an obvious one. And you're just linking magic into it.
I think magic is totally connected to it. ESP, all of that stuff.
It's all stuff that we don't understand.
We don't. There's something beyond what we understand, which there's plenty beyond what we don't understand.
Almost everything.
Yeah, it just doesn't have to be, ESP or ghosts.
Yeah. I have another example, right, which is, people will be like, a unicorn. They'll be like, they're enthralled with the idea of a unicorn. And I sort of feel like, have you seen a giraffe?
Right.
Have you seen a rhinoceros? Like,
a narwhal.
There's cooler stuff in reality, and they're not. And then you get
a rhinoceros can run 35 miles an hour or something.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Yeah.
And then you're sort of. Then you get your Bigfoot believers and your Loch Ness believers and
right.
Yeti people.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have gorillas. Like, we have actual things.
That are pretty damn impressive.
Yeah, that are pretty much like what you're describing. And they're like, yeah, that's not interesting to me at all. They want the myth. They want the fake, they want something beyond our understanding.
So not to gloss over my grand idea, because it is pretty grand. People like magic because it makes them feel better about death and dying. And people are walking around terrified about death and dying, and it bothers them, and they suppress that. And then when they see magic, it makes them feel better about what they're suppressing there. That's my grand theory. What do you think?
It's about as close as I can't think of any other reason. We should ask someone. Just by the numbers we've got.
Well, I think if you ask them, they'll disagree with it.
Well, what percent of people listening have their magical and ghost experiences? Like 80% probably, right? Can we take a call? Call in?
Dimitri,
put
on the next caller, please. And they're defensive of it. Like you said, if you question their magical story, they will get really upset with you. Interesting.
Yeah.
Because you're taking away a sense of safety and security from them.
Yeah. I mean, because think of that. If you're like, something weird happens to you, where you're like, I was walking in the forest, I saw a bear, and someone's like, did you? And like, you wouldn't get mad, you'd just be like, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I forget what this guy's name is. I think it's Stamets, and he's a mushrooms expert, and Joe Rogan had him on a podcast. And he gave an example of precognition he had. So this is a very educated, accomplished guy. And he basically was, I can't remember the story, so I'm going to screw it up. But I'll give my best version of it. Took a bunch of mushrooms, so he was high, and he was having a psychedelic experience. And he had some vision of a bunch of bodies lying out in the field or something, like an apocalyptic vision. And then like a few days later, I think there was a flood or something, and he went by a meadow, and there was a bunch of cows lying in the field dead. And I thought, yeah, you call that a coincidence. That's a once-in-a-lifetime. The guy's 55 years old. That's a once-in-a-lifetime coincidence. I don't think that's precognition.
Right. And he left they weren't cows in the vision, right? Like
I don't remember,
but he left some door open there for.
Well, my experience is that people have a vision, and then when they find something in life that coincides with the vision, they rewrite the vision to be more closely aligned to what they experienced.
The most common thing I've heard with these experiences too is it starts with the standard. All right, I was in bed, but I was not asleep. And already I'm like, okay, I think I know what
That's
happened
all
here.
the alien abduction stuff, Dan.
This was not a dream. Okay.
Do you remember, I think it was in the 80s or maybe the 90s, there was a Harvard psychology professor who came out. I think he was working with patients, and he said, there's something to this alien abduction thing. And he came out like, yeah, these people really are being abducted by aliens. Essentially is what he said. I could be totally wrong, but that's how I remember it. And all the stories were exactly that, where I was like drifting off to sleep, but I wasn't asleep.
Yeah. I had been drinking, but not so much. Just a little.
The psychology profession hasn't really done us a great service, I think. What do you think? They've done some dopey things over the years, right?
They should be the force for shooting this stuff down, right? I mean,
right. But it's like when you get in that, you take something that's really not a hard science and you put it next to science and you start calling it a science, that's where you can get in trouble.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that hard sciences are doing that much better with their research either.
Right. That's to the point of the professor from Cornell, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of these findings are getting called into question, right, in all sciences, I think.
Right. That's interesting, but maybe that's the benefit of the marketplace. Like once you can actually build and sell an electric car, and people buy it and drive around in it, it kind of answers the question about whether we can have an electric car or not, right? But when you're still in the theory phase and the experiment phase.
Yeah. So another side to this that I had, like, that I would think is more concerning, like I had one friend that said, like Ouija board. You know the Ouija board stories?
Yeah.
I have a few.
You call it a Ouija?
Ouija board?
I call it a Ouija board.
I think it's Ouija board.
It's spelled Ouija, definitely.
I don't know.
But in my neighborhood, we pronounce it Ouija.
Yeah.
Not that I ever had one, but.
I had a vision that it should be called Ouija. It was sort of came to me one time. And so ever since then.
I wonder what the etymology of that word is.
I said, cool. Ouija board, and it went right to the A.
Right.
Like, my hand went shot over to the A, and I was like, oh,
it's the original Google.
Yeah. Sorry, board.
All right, so tell me your Ouija board story.
They were going through the ghost stories, and a friend of mine said, Ouija board story was like, well, mine was spelling out things only I could know in like a language that only she spoke.
Mm.
And so then that was like concerning to me, because she's like, how do you explain that? And I'm like, you're like spelling things and you don't even know you're doing it. Like, that's sort of, I don't understand that mentality at all. Like, it must have been her spelling it and she just didn't even know she was moving the thing. I was like, you're a click away from like being like, I don't know why the knife just appeared in my hand. You know what I mean? Like when you're spelling things and you don't even know that you're doing it on purpose, that's a concern, right?
It's concerning. There was a problem with something very similar to that, I think, in the 80s and 90s. I wish I could remember what the situation was. These kids who had some kind of some sort of illness or disability where they couldn't communicate.
Oh, and, yeah. Oh, I know about this. Yeah.
These caretakers came in and started like steadying their hands.
It was autism.
So they could spell.
Yeah.
And then it was like a Ouija board thing, and they started spelling
I know
some crazy
all about
stuff.
That. Yeah, it was terrible. I forgot the name of it, but yeah, so like uncommunicative autistic kids. So there's a range of autism. So people think of like slightly odd acting as autistic, but these are kids that were close to vegetables, like they couldn't communicate at all, couldn't speak. And then they said, like, if you basically put their hand, I remember, it's called if you like want to Google search it, facilitated communication.
Yes.
And so if you put their hand on a keyboard, they wouldn't do anything. You know, they wouldn't move. And it was like, but if you put your hand on their hand and just kind of make it easier for them to move their finger. And then these kids were like, hey, Mom, how you doing? I had a good day of school. And it's a terrible tragedy. It's not funny because the parents were like, oh, it's my awful. God, like my kid is back. Like my kid is communicating with me.
Yeah.
And they just didn't use standard scientific method to see if it worked.
Right.
And so like as soon as they put up a board where the person holding the hand couldn't see the keyboard, the kid would never say not a word.
Yeah.
And then when the thing is, they still didn't want to bust it because the parents were so happy. It was sort of like no harm done here, you know?
Yeah.
But here's where it blew up. One of the kids, and this is an interesting story, actually, one of the kids spelled out something like some sexual abuse claim.
Right.
You know, like this guy touched me or so. And then the guy accused was like, wait a second, what is this? Like, it's like, you know, there was like law enforcement but you had a kid that never even said anything.
Yeah.
And then it became like, so then they really started looking into it. and then it didn't look good for that the person holding the hands too. You know what I mean? Like the person holding the hands, like you just had this kid spell out that he's been abused. Like, so it was a horrible mess. And
Very
my
dark.
understanding is this blew up something like 30 years ago, and I think they're still doing it. Like there's still
Some people are still using that so-called process.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I don't blame them. I think it's really sad. I think,
Well, there's a lot of incentives. Like
Yeah.
you said, the parents feel good, and then the person the facilitator probably feels like they're doing an amazing service.
right. And there may even be some, like, I'm not sure about this. I haven't heard, but since there's this range of autistic
right.
kids, maybe there are kids that can spell something. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
at the high end of the kids that are in this
They should
program,
invest in a way to find a better way to allow them to communicate than
Yeah.
a person holding their hand, which is subject to all that subjective influence.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, even the person just not being able to see the keyboard. That's what blew it up, when they just blocked the keyboard.
But if they start doing that, Dan, it's a non-starter, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people are, I mean, what was the thing? What's theirs that people that used to get hysterical dancing, like getting people, like we're talking about like one thing spreading to
Uh-huh.
a person, like
Yeah.
the, what was that called? The St. Vitus dance. Remember, have you heard of that?
I have not heard of that. It's a contagion of hysteria? of
Yeah, where
some sort?
people start frantically dancing in public, and there's stories of like 100 people in like a public square out of their minds,
Raving.
dancing, raving. Yeah,
That's interesting.
and through history, there's been different outbreaks of it.
Different outbreaks.
Yeah,
So it's like an unplanned.
Yeah.
What do they call that?
I don't know.
Flash mob.
The flash mob. Yeah, but
But
like
unplanned,
but with the
spontaneous flash mob.
with the people in it going, I don't know what happened.
That
afterwards.
is hysterical.
Imagine being like some.
What is it called again? I got to look
St.
this up.
Vitus dance.
How do you spell Vitus?
Vitus.
Saint Vitus dance. That's
If I had it
awesome.
right. And then can you imagine just being some farmer in 16 whatever, like
Right.
going to get some water from the well, suddenly
Walking down
it's
the
like
road and you see
300
that.
people frantically.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Like, all right.
Slowly go back to the
Yeah,
farm.
let's just turn this ox around. I'll get water later.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's probably a lot of people listening that are angry because they've had their ghost experiences. But I don't know.
Oh,
I'm
right.
always willing to listen. I just haven't personally heard one that's been that compelling to me.
Well, the other thing I think to not be such a negative Nancy
Yeah.
is magic. It assuages the fear of death and dying, but it also stimulates the thrill of possibility of like what could happen next. You know what I mean? What are we going to see next?
Right.
So that's a positive. That's pretty cool.
Well, any of these conversations, you can see how, like, if you're me, you're like the dud in the conversation, right? They're going around the room. Everyone has excited, laughing, telling stories. And
You're
I'm
the
just
wet blanket.
Yeah, exactly. Like they get to me, and it's like, yeah, no.
Can we please stop inviting Dan to these parties?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Dan's here. Put away the Ouija board. He's gonna ruin it. I told you that my one Ouija board experience. Did I ever tell you that?
No.
I was with friends. It was college, and there's three of us. Like three of you keep your hand on the thing, and that Ouija board was spelling all kinds of stuff.
All right.
For us, like answering questions, going
Yeah.
yes, no, and the reason it was doing it is because like I was doing it.
Yeah.
And the trick was, what I'd do is I'd start moving it, and then I'd immediately be the loudest skeptic. I'd be like, "Oh, this is a bunch of crap. I know you're moving it, Scott." Like, and he'd be like, "I'm not. I swear to God, I'm not." I was like, "Well, then you are." And he'd be like, "No, I'm not either." And these guys were flipping out, and like, and I'm like, "You're such liars." I know one of you's moving it, but I was just spelling stuff. So I have had fun with the Ouija board, but I've never had a mystical experience.
No.
Parker Brothers, mysticism. All right. I don't know why we're even talking about mystical things and ghosts and.
Well, we got my grand theory out for the week.
Yeah, the grand theory.
Yeah. So we're going to
I buy
add
it.
to the grand theory is magical thinking also makes you feel good about possibilities of new discoveries, which is
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
And I'm not mad at anybody that
No.
has this experience or
No.
anything. It's not like I'm arguing against them. I just think.
No, I envy it a little bit. Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, Dan, we have a list.
Oh, a list to go through.
We got a list to go through. We have still some time. We haven't even started the list. This list only has 10.
You know what that whole conversation came from?
What?
Us both having colds.
Right.
And you saying, did like one of us like sync up the
Right.
cold?
Oh, right. I hope that I was the alpha and then you and trained your cold to me.
I'm pretty sure we just have colds. I'm pretty sure they're not synced up.
I don't know. You should call your professor. We may be onto something here.
All right, our list of things. We can get through this one, I think.
All right.
Maybe.
This was a pretty good list, Dan. I don't know if I should bother asking you where you got it from.
No.
No. Okay. Could you do us the honor of reading it?
Sure. Well, the title of it is 10 things. And 10 things mentally strong people don't do.
Don't do.
So a lot of people, listening, the podcast originated in your gym. A lot of people that are working to be mentally strong, working to, just even coming in the gym.
Right.
Is sort of part of the reason, I think, is to be stronger in some way, physically, mentally, right? Everyone has to have some motivation to be stronger, either physically or mentally. Or
I've
both.
always been intrigued by strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So these are things mentally strong people don't do.
Okay. And it's 10 of them. What's the first one, Dan?
They don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves. So I agree with that. Although, coincidentally, I feel sorry for myself at this moment that I'm agreeing with that.
Why do you feel sorry for yourself?
I just, mildly, I'm sick, and I
forgot to check in. So you're at a 6 probably today instead of the 7.
No, 4.
You're at a 4.
Yeah,
oh,
I'm sick.
Wow. I'm so sorry
I got
to
a
hear.
cold. So, but I agree. The way I take it, obviously everyone knows you don't sit around feeling sorry for yourself, but I take it as taking responsibility for things. My kids would drive me crazy if they ever came home and were like, this test was so unfair and this teacher was being unfair and this happened to me and that happened to me. I just don't like that kind of talk, even if it was an unfair test.
Right.
What's that do for you?
What does it do for you? That's
to
a great
sit around,
question.
to sit around and complain or feel bad about it or feel sorry for yourself, right? It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I think the feeling bad, this goes back to my epiphany from last week, Dan. If you remember, there's a positive reason for any negative emotion, right?
Right.
So you're feeling bad about your situation, so you analyze it, like you said, and what can we do better? Well, there's nothing we can do about it. Then move on. That's what mentally strong people would do, definitely.
Right.
Okay, what's number 2?
So we're really going to try to crank through this.
Yeah, why not?
We can do it. They don't shy away from change. I'm not sure about that one. I would say they don't shy away from risk, but I don't know about change. Because you could be mentally strong and just not want change, right? You could be like this super mentally tough farmer who just likes it on your farm and doesn't want change, right?
I think the change that applies here would be the change that's out of your control. So something happens that is completely out of your control that makes things different, then you have to be comfortable with that.
Like if the change comes, you adapt. You don't have to seek it out.
You don't have to. Like you said, that was a great example. Somebody's doing what they love and what their life mission is, then why would they change that? They're not just looking for change, novelty for the sake of novelty. Right.
Right. But say you have to retire from your job. If you're mentally strong, you don't shy away from it.
Right. Yeah, I think they're pointing to sometimes people cling to something, an old relationship, an old job, a situation that's no longer serving them, and it's not the right place for them, that it's not on their path, and they're clinging to that. So that's really not even change, like you're saying. I guess it's change, but it's more about being on your path, I think, and taking what's on it.
Right.
We're clicking through these.
Right. They don't waste energy. This is 3 now. They don't waste energy on things they can't control. I agree with that.
That's kind of what we were just talking about.
Yeah. What about I'm not trying to poke holes in it, but it just occurs to me.
Dan, as a person who's been accused of being a hole poker for many years of my life, Please poke away.
Okay. What about like politics or social issues, right? That you can't control that. Us like sitting around.
Well, here's the thing. The word control is overly simplified. So what does that? What does control mean? Does control mean you have 100% influence over something? There's few things we have 100% influence over, right? It's always a degree of influence we have. You know, you can have a tiny bit of influence. You don't really control that person, but you say the right thing in the right time, you get a different outcome. So that's not control, right?
Right.
It's a much more nuanced approach. So this idea of there are some things where it's pretty clear you have very little influence on them, so maybe it's not worth the effort of thinking about it too much and putting too much actual effort into something. So I think the more accurate term would be about influence instead of control. But you hear that all the time. People use that. It's a short hand way of thinking, I guess.
But I know what you mean. Like, say you had a big event and there was an ice storm, and messing up or a wedding, and it was going to rain. You adapt to it instead of just obsessing on, I can't believe it's raining, and like, I can't stop the rain, so what do I do? Instead of just,
well, look, another extreme example. Somehow a ghost has come in your house.
Right.
No, I don't know. No, somehow you're in a dire, bizarre situation where you're handcuffed. A Yeti has handcuffed you and has a gun to your head, is going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And your feet your ankles are shackled together. You have no control of the situation. Well, you're still going to try to do something.
Yeah.
You can influence this. Who knows? You know what I mean? You can kick the pistol out of the Yeti's hand or something. I don't know.
Like, this is a bad situation. I'm shackled.
Right.
There's a Yeti in the house, and he's got a gun.
And I'm straitjacketed.
Yeah.
Right.
That's a bad scenario.
It's a bad scenario.
I don't foresee being in it.
You have no control, but you could have a little influence. If you think about it.
You could try to soothe the Yeti.
Right. You could try to talk your way out of it.
Yeah.
If you watch a lot of the gangster movies, when they're about to kill the person in the middle of the woods, they start begging for mercy. Hell, it's worth a shot, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's worth a try, right?
Right. So sometimes, So
seemed to work in Miller's Crossing.
Love that movie.
Yeah, although it didn't really work because he was setting him up.
Right. So I don't know. Did it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You have to watch that movie. Great movie, though. So I think the more accurate way to look at it is about degrees of influence instead of control.
Right. And a side point, we gave a little tip about if you find yourself in that Yeti situation.
That's right.
I mean, you never know what that. I don't think it'll come into play, but you don't know. All right. So number 4. This is one I totally agree with. They don't worry about pleasing everyone.
So good.
That's a really big one.
That's a big one. Took me my whole life really to learn this, I think.
Because it's easy. It's easy. I'm sure me at 22 would be like, yeah, I don't. But there's deeper levels. There's levels of really not trying to please everyone else.
I think there's levels. I think at 22, I would say, yeah, I am trying to please everybody. I wasn't even trying not to. And you can waste a lot of time and waste your life away doing that. And there's a certain percentage of people that are not pleasable by anybody. And if you're trying to please everyone, you're going to end up gravitating toward them like a drain, and you're going to all your energies are going to go down that drain trying to please this nudnik who's unpleasable.
They'll want more and more.
They're insatiable. Like a tiny percentage of people are insatiable in that regard. And at the Academy, so we had the Academy open now 14 years. I've had a couple of these crazies come through, and wow, they will not stop, and they will take all of your energies if you allow it. Yeah.
Right. And I also think there's people that aren't so bad. There could be nice people that if you try to please them too much, they sort of accidentally, like they don't even do it intentionally, but they start feeling sort of almost like above you, like you should be pleasing me. Like, you know what I mean? Like you do nice things for them. They start feeling like
you're subservient to them.
And even subconsciously. I'm not even saying they're
agree.
like a bad person, but they could just start feeling that way.
Yeah.
So you have to watch out for that, I think.
I definitely agree.
And yeah, I had an example. I remembered it for my first lesson in being a boss to someone, like at work.
All right.
It was back in graduate school.
Yeah.
It was back to graduate school again, where I was just being the buddy, you know. This is sort of a little different than pleasing, but being the buddy.
Yeah.
And so I was like the graduate student, and I think it was an undergraduate working under me.
Right.
So I was his boss.
Yep.
We were showing a movie to the class, and we were up in like the projector room. And
Okay.
so you know,
So
the
this
whole
is an
class-
old film projector.
yeah, like
Okay. Yeah.
one of those. And below us was the whole class, like a big room full of people watching this. It was like more like an auditorium kind of situation. And so he's my buddy.
This is in like the 1990 or something like this, late 80s or something.
90s. Yeah.
90s. Yeah.
And so we're buddies, you know. I'm doing like, oh, what bar did you go to last night?
right.
We're buddy, like not boss kind of relationship.
Yep.
And then partway through the thing, he's like, hey, check this out. He's chewing gum. And he's like, check this out. I'm going to throw gum down into someone's hair. And I'm
To
like,
the group watching this.
yeah,
film.
to the students.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? I'm like, don't do it. And he's like, I'm doing it. I'm like, seriously, don't do it. And he's like, I'm doing it. And it was that moment was my first realization, like, I've been too friendly to this kid. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be his boss. I've been friendly. I'm talking about hangovers with him. Now he thinks he can do whatever he wants. And I just had to have, like, this abrupt, on-the-spot change of energy.
Change the rules.
Yeah, where on the spot had to be like, I forgot what I said, but something very harsh, you know, like, you're going to be immediately, put that down. Put the gum, suddenly I'm talking like a dad, you know, I'm like, put the gum, throw the gum out, and I don't want to hear anything. Like, don't even talk the rest of this time. And, something where I just established that different relationship, like immediately and on the spot. And it was like the first lesson, and that everyone's learned sooner or later, that you can't always be. So the thing is, some people you could easily be like their boss and be very friendly, and they'll be fine. You know, some people are fine with it. You can act however you want, and they'll be fine because they're just people that understand your role and their role.
Right.
And I have friends.
It's a mature outlook, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some people though can't do it. Like
a lot
some
of people
you
can't.
Most people, I'd say.
I agree.
So I think a lot of people, especially people starting out like in business, think if I was the boss, I'd be like the coolest, I'd be the nicest, be the friendliest, I'd go out drinking with everyone. And then you find out you can't. You know, you can't.
You confuse the roles, like you're saying.
Yeah.
It's very confusing for people. I found even at the academy, it's better if I just give an order. If I just say, do this, take out the trash, whatever, clean that mat, instead of saying, hey, could you do me a favor?
Right.
Please clean that. Like, that sounds like a very nice, cordial thing to do, but my experience is people can't hear that repeatedly over time without it affecting your relationship.
They start feeling like they're doing you a favor.
They literally start, you're paying them, they're working for you, and they're doing you a favor, and then they resent you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I don't do that at all anymore.
Not mean, but a little, you can't always have that pleasing.
You can't.
Tone.
No, it doesn't serve anybody. Definitely not. Yeah.
All right. 5,
Let's go.
they don't fear taking calculated risks. Sure. We've talked about this on this. That was a whole theme of a week about you going out to your tournament.
Yes.
And the possibility of looking bad and the possibility of failing and all these things.
Yeah.
And so we've talked about that, and I agree with it.
Definitely. I mean, if you think about it, if you live where we live, Dan, here, at this point in time, I don't want to say this the wrong way, but for the most part, people are living a pretty wealthy lifestyle here.
Yeah.
So they're in a position where they can take some risks, and they won't have lethal or fatal outcomes by their risks. You know what I mean?
You're not, if you plant, it's not like planting the wrong crop and starving.
And your family dies.
Yeah.
We're kind of beyond that. So I think calculated risks are good.
Yeah. All right. Moving on.
Let's move on.
6, they don't dwell on the past. Sure, I agree with that one too. That's the same presence, right? Like, don't spend too much time worrying about the future. And what I try to do about the future, not to get away from the point, which is the past, but the future is I try to plan and not spend too much time worrying. So you're prepared, like prepare for different outcomes without worrying about them.
Right.
Because I, like everyone else, spend too much time. If you added up all the hours I spent worrying about things that never happened, you know what I mean? Like just worrying and worrying about something that might happen.
Oh,
and
right.
It doesn't even happen. And you're like, I just spent all this time worrying and feeling unhappy.
It wasn't fun.
And
yeah. Not only did you lose the use of the time, it wasn't a great experience.
Yeah, you're unhappy.
Yeah.
You're worrying. And it's the same it's very similar looking backwards, the past, right? Like, it's done. And just
I totally agree. I think the ideal way to do it, see, there's a lot of new age you talk about. You got to be present, Dan.
Yeah.
Be present in the moment. Dan.
But it is true.
Be in your feet.
Yeah.
Dan, breathe. Be present here with me now. And, yeah, that's great. But you do have to think about the past sometimes, and you do have to think about the future, what you're going to do, and you got to plan for it. So I think, you look to the past to learn. Once you learn 90%, not even 100%, let's forget about it. We got, most of what we're going to learn out of it. Forget about it. Let's plan for the future. We'll set out a process of plans, some long-term, medium, short-term goals, and then we'll get back in the present and start moving toward them. And every once in a while, we'll pull up our head and, I was asking, we mentioned Craig Lewin in virtually every episode. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we got to keep doing that.
He's a swimmer for people who swims miles and miles in the ocean.
He sent me a message. We were saying, like, how long would it take to swim 2 miles in a pool? Yeah. He said it is 1 million laps.
It's probably not 1 million. It's probably
a lot. That's what he told me.
1,000.
I don't know. But
it could be 1,000. It's like a lot.
Yeah.
It's forever. It's farther than I could swim.
But I asked him about, so he swam 20 miles from the island of Catalina to the coast of California, right? It's a 20-mile swim. Only 500 people have done it in the history of the world or something. Amazing accomplishment. But I thought it was an interesting metaphor for this sort of like being in the moment thing. I said, how often, if you're swimming there, you're in the moment, you head down, you're swimming. I said, how often do you look up and to see your progress, where you are, where you're going? And it was pretty frequently. It's like every 10 strokes you got to look up. And I thought that was a pretty good metaphor.
I thought you were going to say he doesn't look up at all.
If you don't look up, you're going to end up totally off course.
Oh,
yeah, in the middle of the ocean someplace. He mentioned also that if you're right-handed and right-dominant, you're going to tend to move in one direction more than the other. This can affect your trajectory. But I think he said every 10 or so strokes, you got to look up.
So you're saying this is like life.
That's
every
life.
10 strokes, look up, take stock, look around.
Yes. You choose your goal. You're going to swim this 10-mile swim, and you plan it out. You prepare. You get in the water. You start going, but you still got to look up every once in a while and see if you're on course, or even reevaluate. It may not make sense. You may be surrounded by sharks or something. A storm is brewing, and you got to call it quits. So,
and the one thing, and maybe this is slightly different, about don't dwell on the past. I agree with that, but and there's this side we said about learn. There's another side which is, I don't know if I mean this is sort of a broad point, but this is I personally, I also think I like to at least acknowledge the past. Like, don't bury anything. Like, a lot of people sort of bury memories or refuse, or refuse to acknowledge.
Describe that more. What do you mean? Can you give me an example?
Someone can have an unhappy experience.
Okay.
And then you talk to them about it, and they're like, "Oh no, that was great." That kind of putting up walls about things that happen, or like, I don't think about that, or.
Dan,
I'm not even talking about deep trauma, but I think people do it all the time. Of like, I'm on, like, I maybe it's just my personality, but I like everything out, and I don't like any elephants in the back of my room. Like, you know what I mean? Like, everything
and why?
out.
What's the problem with the elephant in the back of the room?
I think it wears away at people. I think, you know what I mean? Like, it's always there bothering people. I like things out in the open.
I wonder.
And like unhappy experiences, like, you know, if you go through something unhappy, and I know you're more this way too, if you'll be like, that was unhappy, that was a bad experience, as opposed to like, oh no, that was all great, and I don't want to talk about it anymore, and like just ignoring it and moving on. Maybe that's good for some people. This isn't like a professional psychological approach. I just like everything out in the open. I don't like to bury things and ignore things that happen.
Well, I would say this. I was going to disagree with you, but maybe I don't disagree with you. I was going to say, yeah, if something happens to you and you feel bad about it, yeah, it's probably makes sense to acknowledge that you're not feeling good about it, and try to figure out what that means for you. You know, what do you have to learn from this?
To examine
what do you have to do from it, and then move on. But I will say this. There's been a lot of negative things in my life that I've totally forgotten about, and it hasn't hurt me at all.
That's better.
Yeah, and it wasn't any strategy.
You've actually forgotten them.
Completely forgotten them. My brother would bring up something. Remember that? And I'd be like, oh, yeah. That was pretty awful. And I had completely forgotten about it. It has no impact, I don't believe.
Were you like less happy that he brought it up? You're like, I wish.
No, but I did. I was not less happy. But, no. But it did make me remark about how strange memory is.
Yeah.
That you could forget something like that. And I think I am fortunate in that I have a relatively positive mental sort of outlook. So things that are negative that don't really serve me, I can forget pretty good. Yeah.
Right. It's sort of a gray area, right? It sort of depends on what you're talking about.
Right. All right. What's next?
I think we could actually finish this list if we bust through
all right.
them, right? 7. They don't make the same. These are mentally strong people. Don't make the same mistakes over and over.
I think that's so key. And
it's a piece of what we said. It's if you examine your past and then move on.
I find myself in my 50s sometimes going, oh, yeah, this is that lesson I've been learning for the last 30 years. And I'm still learning it, Dan. Yeah, so it's not easy. I think some of the mistakes that are sort of associated with your fundamental personality and human nature, those are the hardest ones, because you're almost hardwired to make the mistake. So to change that, I think, is the most difficult. Those are the tricky mistakes.
All right, 8. They don't resent other people's success. This is what
mentally strong people. Okay.
They do not resent other people's success.
What do you think?
I totally agree. I've talked about this before. The problem is the counterbalance for this one, I think, is competitiveness.
Right.
So I have never resented anyone's success at all, and I'm glad. I think it's a good aspect of my personality. I legit do not resent other people's success. I have friends with incredible professional success, and I don't resent it one bit, and I know I don't, and they know I don't. You know what I mean?
You're not suppressing it? It's not an elephant in the back of the room?
That's what I'm saying. I legit feel good, glad for them. I hope they have more success.
Right.
It just doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
And that's not like some philosophical approach. I just don't feel it. I just don't, you know what I mean? That's not something I'm doing. I just don't, I wish them the best, and
I feel the same way. I think in the past there have been moments when I did have that sense of being sort of annoyed that somebody did something really cool. And I'm like, oh. But then I try to use that to stimulate me to get off the couch.
But I also have friends that I feel do resent it away. I don't resent, but I think it goes. So here's the downside of me. I think part of the reason I don't resent it is also I'm not naturally super competitive.
Yeah.
Which can be bad.
Right.
But I don't, so I'm not competing with them. You know what I mean? I don't care if they're, they're like, now I'm more professionally successful. I've made more money or whatever. I'm like, that's fine. I don't care. Yeah,
I remember one of my buddies from college who's a wonderful guy, super good guy, and very competitive, though.
Yeah.
And we just gotten out of college. I don't know when it was, and one of our college mates just made a ton of money on Wall Street, and he was in the Wall Street Journal. I think they might even have one of those little pencil drawings of him. And I guess my buddy was he said he couldn't sleep for a couple of days. It annoyed him so bad. And I was like, really? But he's a very competitive guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe something to.
And he's super successful.
Yeah.
So that's why I said mentally. I think some successful people do get irked by other people's success, and it stimulates them to get out there. Yeah.
All right, let's polish this off. It'll be our first list we've ever finished.
Unbelievable.
9, they don't give up after. So mentally strong people do not give up after their first failure.
Yeah,
that's good.
I think that's good. Too many people I see are so weak in that regard. I mean, it's tricky. There's many levels of this, even in jiu-jitsu. I try to do a technique. I meet some resistance. What should I do? I should flow to some complementary technique. Maybe I go back to that. Or do I just need to persist a little bit more? It's so subjective and so depends on the context that it's really hard to tell. But a lot of people, I think, in our comfortable sort of, temperature-controlled society that we live in here, as soon as they meet some resistance, they're like, oh, this wasn't meant to be for me. Screw it. And they're off. And they lose that little zest of novelty, that excitement of doing something new. Once that's gone and then they meet a failure, then they're like, this isn't for me. Like they kind of take a quasi-religious take on it and they move on to something else. I think you never can really get any kind of mastery in anything if you do that, right?
Yeah, and in the jiu-jitsu example, I just noticed it this week. Sometimes it happens where it's like someone failed. They try to armbar you and it fails. And you're like, oh, so, I got out. And then they just do it again and you're caught and you're like, hey, like you almost feel like, wait, but you failed. Like, I can't believe
supposed to try this
I can't believe you just went for it again. I just got out.
Yeah.
And it works a lot, like
it does. I notice coaching jiu-jitsu competitors, sometimes my best coaching advice would be to like, no, keep doing that. No, stay with that. And then they end up getting the submission.
Right.
So, yeah.
Because just picture someone's like trying to choke you and then they let go. You're like, all right, that's over. Yeah. And then if they just choke you again, you're like, what? What are you doing? I just got out of this.
I guess it's that balance. We have to know when to flow to something new, when we meet some resistance, and when to persist is impossible to know universally. You have to figure it out in the moment.
Let's finish it up because I feel like it's the same point. They don't expect immediate results.
Oh, right.
Same kind of idea as the last one, right? Don't give up after your first failure. Don't expect immediate results. Like, you might have to.
A lot of times when people change their eating or their exercise, and they're looking for a compositional change in their body, and very often those changes lag all the behaviors that you're doing. So if you don't hang in there, you're not going to get the reward of any evidence of change. So,
right.
Yeah.
And again, jiu-jitsu is terrible that way too. There's these bad plateaus where you can just be like, what is going on? I'm not getting better. Everyone has, they're different lengths for different people, but everyone has to work through those.
Definitely. A lot of the change I see in jiu-jitsu players is they accumulate sort of a collection of improvements, so to speak, in their jiu-jitsu, and then suddenly there's a tipping point where they get one little detail extra and they just go to a different level. It's not like this gradual linear progress. What it seems apparent is they just jump to another level.
I think that metaphor for other things in life, maybe.
I would think so, yeah. Like you could be making improvements and it's not apparent, and then suddenly, you just hit that last straw that breaks the camel's back, and suddenly, bam, you're at a different level. Definitely. We made it through the list, Dan.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
We finished our sick. We sound like two, I don't know, like old smokers or something. Just like the old grandpa smoker episode of the
grandpa smoker episode.
Yeah.
I like it.
Here's my life advice.
Life advice from grandpas.
Yeah. Now, if this is the most listened to episode, we'll probably have to just always sound like this.
That's it. We'll come in with the fake gravelly voices.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, thank you. That was another awesome podcast. You are brilliant as usual. Thank you for bringing in this list. And I want to remind everybody that Dan is your guru. Listen to anything and everything he tells you. And please rate and review the podcast. Please share it with your friends. Tell them about it. And And if you have any questions, if you want us to talk about anything on the podcast, just message me, reach out to us, and we'll be happy to talk about it. So we'll see you next week.